there's this relationship with time, or rather timelessness and light, that is quite prevalent in how one experiences your work. And I've particularly felt that with Rashmi, and to bring that in as the first work in our conversation, the way you worked with sound to build this experience of light, and also the way the viewer encounters these images that release threads or connections into the wider expanse of your work with nature comes in through Rashmi. Could you speak about how this work ends up being a bridge in some way with your background as a musician and also your practice now as a photographer?
I think, light itself is very close to the media, no? Because for what is photography? It is basically a collection of light. Image is a collection of different light and wavelengths, which eventually forms memory. But I love the fact that how light can be present at the same time. It's also something not tangible, something that you cannot, just hold or touch. And I think there's that sense of mystery or fascination regarding that the forms that light can create and change is core for my interest. And when I'm exploring in different works, it comes naturally either individually or part of the larger story. I think several of my works, such as Origin, Rashmi, and Oh Great Life, I think these three are also kind of a thread of work that are somehow, in a way, largely connected. All of this work, sound has become a very important protagonist in a way. And I think there was a point in my practice when I felt that often images or a still photograph, as much powerful it can be, it has also limitations, especially just from the sense of how our senses work, right? With images, we are only using a sense of our sight, but sound is such a crucial sense that we have among our five senses, and which helps to elaborate certain experience, which helps to communicate in a much more stronger way, often even no image can do. Like sound itself can stand by itself, and I was at that point, I was thinking that how do I bring that in my visual practice? And also because I myself was, before coming to visuals, I was actually more into music and sound, and that is my origin in a way. So I thought, okay, it's basically we are same, no? It's not like two different people are working. It might be two different mediums, but it's just the same individual who is reacting sometimes with sight, sometimes with hearing, or with sound. And I felt a need to find a way to accommodate those two different media, so that when it is the a work is experienced by an audience, a viewer, they are also being able to experience that with all these sensibilities. That's how actually it started, kind of those bridge. And Origin was the work that it kicked it off uh, with this kind of experiments. Um, and right after Origin, when it was much more simpler execution, second take was Rashmi, which is obviously much more complicated because in terms of its images, in terms of its different soundscapes. I did a lot of field recordings. I made a lot of, well, not a lot of, but specific compositions using different analog and electronic instruments. Uh, that was also a new, you know, direction for me, which you see the continuation in Oh Great Life, which has more sound works. And so I think that's the connection. It was a way to kind of reconnect my younger self, my first practice in art, to my visual practice.
And something I can't help draw connections with when looking at your work is also the strong presence and relationship with nature. You mentioned field recordings as well in some way, and I'm guessing some
Mhm.
of these came in with nature.
Yes,
But
definitely.
we're also moving into the visual form, whether it's astral, the sky, and more recently, the moon and the crow. I want to draw on the moon first, which has also been a recurring protagonist in your work. And what you see it in Rashmi, in O Great Life, along with these notions of the arrival or questioning of tomorrow in some sense. And it's as though this form of nature and the moon are time telling.
I think, especially with the moon, it all started during the pandemic. I mean, before it was something much more personal. As for many people, we love to look at moon, but I think during the pandemic, certain things were very limited, especially photographing what I can photograph, and obviously staying in one constant room or a house, balcony or window. You look out and you start noticing the most subtle changes that happens in your surroundings or in nature, you can say. And I think moon was something the most direct way to talk about cycles, because moon for me represents cycles. It does follows through a very disciplined timeline every month, all throughout the year, all throughout our life, which go through different phases. That element that I was interested at that point was circadian rhythm. And obviously we are organic beings, we all have a biological clock, right? And it follows through certain rhythms, and that is what we know as circadian rhythm. And how can I photograph that? How can I at least talk about that in my photographs? So one of the element was obviously sky, but the other one was the most obvious one was moon for me.
And coming to a work that you made during the pandemic in a study of vastness, which is a body of work that you've been creating mainly over the past year. But alongside the moon, there are other elements that you experienced at home during the pandemic and the lockdown. And the crow ends up taking a very prominent place also in this series. How did the crow come in, and what made you focus on the crow? Could you speak about the directions that this work is moving in with the crow itself, but also how it connects with the moon or with your mother's hair and these studies of skylight, of seasons that cohabit the same space in a study of vastness?
As I was speaking, if I call that a work here, or let's say it's easy to have a title, so you can identify. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. That's why I think the title comes in, because it was almost like a study. It was almost like living in an observatory. That's the work I usually earlier used to call observatory work, because I was working from this balcony or window with the camera, and it's like a telescope, and I'm looking at the moon, I'm looking at the sun, I'm looking at the horizon of the sky. I'm also looking at crows, obviously, as you can see. It's all from one place. So the idea of going out in different places and photographing things is not the same here. It's almost like what people do in observatory. They just go in there, and from that one single vantage point, they look out to the world, to the cosmos, and everything. So study of vastness is that it is a way of trying to reach vastness even in the smallest confinement of pandemic, within the pandemic. The crows were the only thing that was like living beings, right? They had an identity, almost like a humanistic identity. And so I was, and of course they're beautiful in their form, and I love them, and that's how it became part of the work, almost like this, part of this circadian rhythm, how, because they also, you can see, if you study, you see how when they wake up, what they do throughout the day, and all that thing. But what happened was, since this year especially, it became, I realized they are also Not just that, they also were just my neighbors. So to be honest, I really don't know where this body of work is going and shaping up to be. And it's at times very overwhelming to kind of uh, articulate.
What's beautiful is also how nature ends up coming into your work in different ways. And perhaps the crow as well becomes a sense of coexistence, because there are elements of the crow one sees in your work earlier. And perhaps this ends up connecting back to the way you look at relationships and a coexistence again. Yeah.
Definitely. One of the funny thing that happened, I was doing a new work, or I started a new research about this series that I'm doing on the coast of Chittagong. And the crow has also entered in that work in a way, even though it was not about the crow. So I think these are also interesting threads, which goes through. I mean, even the works can be about different things. It can deal with different concepts or issues, but I think there's always a personal thread that can go through these different universes. So the crows are doing that. If you look at cats and dogs and crows especially, they are as same residents as any neighborhood. Like you and me, we live in a territorial space. Same for the dogs, same for the cats, the stray ones at least. Same for the crows, they live with ourselves, so they are part of our urban reality in that sense.